My name is Ethan Reyes. I'm 36 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, and my life was almost completely turned upside down by someone I once swore to love. Looking back today, it's strange to think about how small decisions, coldly spoken words, and even silence can become lethal weapons when love turns to control. I never thought I would end up in court fighting for custody of my daughter, much less being accused of things I never did. But what destroyed me most about that whole process wasn't the lie itself. It was the fact that almost no one believed me, except for one person, and it was she who changed everything in the most unexpected way possible. The story begins with my daughter Sophie, who was 10 years old at the time, an observant, sensitive child, with a courage that even I didn't know existed in her. Her mother, my ex-wife, is called Lana Walker. When we met, she was an artist and taught at a community center. She had this different sparkle in her eyes, a free way that enchanted anyone. For a while we were happy. We bought a small house in the suburbs, renovated it together, and made plans like any couple in love. But little by little, that shine turned into something hard, demanding. What was once creativity became disdain, and any gesture I made was interpreted as an attempt to control. At the beginning of the divorce, I accepted everything amicably. I just wanted to make sure Sophie was well taken care of. We agreed on shared custody, defined schedules, everything signed properly. But it soon became clear that Lana wanted something beyond the guard. She wanted to rewrite history, as if I were the villain. It started slowly. Small accusations, comments to her friends, then to my own family. I was unstable. I had tantrums. I was too hard on Sophie. None of these things were true. I work as a medical equipment maintenance technician. I am methodical by nature, even too calm, according to my colleagues. But in her version, I was another man. The first time I received a legal notice alleging that I was emotionally harming my daughter. My hands were shaking. Lana wanted full custody. I said that Sophie cried after my visits, that I brainwashed her, that I pressed her against her mother. It was all a lie. But on paper, with her lawyer's signature, it sounded frighteningly real. I was taken completely by surprise. That week, I barely slept. Sophie stayed with me one rainy weekend, and I remember watching her draw in silence for hours. She had always been introspective, but that day seemed different. I asked if everything was okay. She said, "Mommy thinks you don't love me." It broke me inside. I hugged her tight and said, "I love you more than anything in this world." She just whispered, "I know." The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday. I remember putting on my tie with my hands shaking. My sister, Heather, was with me. Sophie stayed with my neighbor, who was like a grandmother to her. I walked into the courtroom feeling like I was about to be tried for a crime I never committed. Lana's lawyer was prepared, armed with paperwork, timelines, and a rehearsed stance. Lana looked calm, almost serene. But I knew that look. It wasn't calm, it was strategy. The judge, Meredith Cole, was a serious, experienced woman. His face showed no emotion, but his silence was heavy. When Lana's lawyer started talking, he constructed an image of me that I barely recognized. An inflexible, emotionally distant father, with worrying behavior, according to him. They mentioned a day when Sophie cried when she left her mother's house to come with me, as if that were an indication of trauma. Then they read an out-of-context message in which I told Lana, "You need to stop manipulating her head." They used this as proof of aggression. When it was my turn to speak, the judge asked me, "Mr. Reyes, do you have anything to say?" I had so much to say. I wanted to tell you about all the nights I spent at my daughter's bedside when she had a fever. From the drawings she made and stuck on my refrigerator door. How she slept better with me than anywhere else. But nothing came out. My voice cracked. All I could say was, I would never do anything to harm my daughter. The judge just wrote something down on her pad. On the opposite side, Lana looked at me as if she already knew she would win. It was at that moment, in that deafening silence, that the door at the back of the courtroom slowly opened. My neighbor came in with Sophie. It wasn't part of the plan. I didn't even know they were coming. The judge frowned, and the bailiff stepped forward. But before anyone could say anything, Sophie walked to the front with a tablet in her hand. The room froze. She looked straight at the judge and said, "I'm sorry, but I wanted to show you something. It's important." Everyone was silent. Lana instantly turned pale. I didn't know what she had in it, or how she got it. Sophie handed the tablet to the officer, who passed it to the judge. The judge looked at the screen, pressed the play button, and turned the sound up. What we heard next changed everything. The first thing you heard in the video was the sound of dishes clanging, the faint sizzling of a pan on the stove, and then Lana's voice. But it wasn't the sweet, soft voice she used in court. It was tense, harsh, and mocking. You want to know why your father tries so hard to please you? Because he's to blame. Because he knows he's a failure as a man and he wants you not to see that. Then came the sound of footsteps, as if she were walking from one side to the other. Sophie must have been hiding, perhaps behind the bedroom door. And then she would say quietly, "Mommy, please, I just asked if I could take my coat back." Lana's response was a dry cut. "You go with what I tell you. And don't cry. Because if you cry, you'll go straight to school without breakfast." There was a tense pause. Then, a sniffling sound and Sophie's trembling voice. "I'm sorry." The judge paused the video. The room was still silent. But it wasn't the same silence anymore. It was a dense, uncomfortable silence, full of shock and disbelief. Lana's lawyer cleared his throat, visibly disconcerted, and began to whisper something in her ear. But she just kept her eyes on the ground, her shoulders shrugged as if she knew everything was falling apart. The judge looked up, looked at Sophie, and asked softly, "Did you record that, honey?" Sophie nodded. "Why?" she replied, in a low but firm voice. "Because no one believed Dad, and I wanted to show that he was just trying to protect me." At that moment, I couldn't take it. My eyes filled with tears, but I took a deep breath and stood firm. That was her time, her courage. I wasn't going to interrupt. The judge sat back in her chair and stared at the ceiling for a few seconds before saying, "Let's take a 15-minute break. This recording needs to be analyzed carefully." Everyone stood up. Sophie came back to me, and I hugged her carefully, trying not to break the emotional shield she still held. During the break, Lana's lawyer came to my defender with a new settlement proposal. "I think we can resolve this out of court," he said, as if what had just happened was just a matter of technical adjustments. My lawyer responded dryly, "Now, it's not a question of agreement. It's a question of protection." When we returned to the court, the atmosphere was different. The judge asked for silence and, looking directly at Lana, asked, "Can you confirm that this recording was made at your home?" Lana hesitated. Then he said, "Yes, but it was taken out of context." The judge then interrupted her. "There doesn't seem to me to be much context other than a child being emotionally threatened by his own mother. This directly contradicts the allegations made against the father." Lana still tried to justify it. She said she was tired that day, that Sophie was disobeying, that everything was exaggerated. But none of that stuck anymore. What was at stake now was bigger than bruised egos or old resentments. It was a child's emotional security. The judge determined, right then and there, that joint custody would be temporarily suspended, and that Sophie would be fully under my responsibility until the new hearing. From that moment on, Lana would only be entitled to supervised visits in a controlled environment. She tried to protest, but the judge's look was definitive. This court cares about the protection of minors above all else. And today we saw something that should never have happened. After the hearing, I left the courtroom with Sophie holding hands. Heather walked beside us, her eyes red. Sophie was quiet, thoughtful, looking at the cars on the street as if the world was trying to process what she had just done. I knelt down beside her and said, "You were braver than any adult in here." She didn't respond. He just hugged me tightly as if he never wanted to let go again. Over the next few days, everything seemed calmer, but internally, I was in pieces. As much as the judge's decision was the right one, it was accompanied by immense pain. The realization that my daughter had to be the shield between me and a distorted version of the truth. That she had to act like an adult when all she was supposed to be was a child. I started to notice small changes in her. The first day she came home with me, she organized all her toys in the corner of her room. Then he sat on the couch with a notepad and started writing. "What are you doing?" I asked. "A list of what I like here. I want to remember it when I'm sad." On the list, she wrote, "The couch smells like vanilla. Dad sings while he cooks. We watch cartoons together. It's peaceful here." Later that week, I received a call from the court-appointed social worker. She needed to schedule a visit to assess the environment and talk to Sophie. I accepted right away. When the day came, the woman, called Miss Carter, was extremely kind. He asked me some light questions, and then was alone with Sophie for about 20 minutes in the room. Later, when she left, she told me, "Your home is safe, but more important than that, your daughter knows she is loved, and that makes all the difference." I was silent for a while. I just nodded. Sometimes the greatest recognition comes in the small details, and at that moment, that was all I needed to hear. But we knew that this was just the beginning. There would be another hearing, more documents, and perhaps more attacks. But now, we were no longer alone. Now, the truth had found a voice, and it was much stronger than any well-staged lie. In the week following the hearing, I began to realize how Sophie's courage had become an anchor for me. I still woke up in the middle of the night, as if my body was waiting for another attack, another summons, another low blow. But when I looked at her sleeping in the next room, breathing deeply, without murmurs, without surprises, I remembered, now, it's the two of us. And she is no longer alone. We start to create new habits. Every night after dinner, we wrote in a notebook called Things That Make Us Feel Safe. It was her idea. On the first page, she drew two figures holding hands in front of a house with stars in the sky. It's us coming back from court, she explained. But in my version, I asked, what changes in your version? She replied without hesitation, Mommy isn't screaming, and you're not scared. Her sentence moved me in a way that I can't explain in words. For a long time, I thought I was protecting Sophie from the worst. Not fighting back, trying to keep the peace. But that silence only fueled the lies. In the end, it was she who brought us out of the shadows. I received the report from the social worker a few days later. It was direct, objective, but full of important details. Lana showed signs of controlling behavior, did not recognize her own mistakes, and on several occasions used her daughter as an emotional shield. As Sophie reported, she was often punished for showing affection towards her father. There was also mention of the video, and the impressive maturity with which the child was able to express his reality. The report recommended that maternal visits continue to be supervised until further psychological evaluation. When I read that, I didn't feel immediate relief. I felt sadness. Sad to see my daughter involved in something so heavy, when all she wanted was to play, study, draw. But I also felt respect. A deep respect for that little soul who refused to be silenced, who saw a chance to change things, and had the courage to do it. The new hearing was scheduled for a month from now. Enough time for us to prepare new documents, statements, and also for Sophie to remain in an emotionally stable environment. I started taking her to art therapy sessions with an incredible professional called Jenna Klein, which used paint, collage, and stories to help children work through trauma. Sophie loved it from day one. After the second session, she showed me a painting she made. It was a big heart made of colorful scraps with a house in the center. This house is my heart, and we live there now. The therapist called me to talk privately. He said Sophie showed clear signs of repressed anxiety, but also above-average resilience. She saw things she shouldn't have, yes, Jenna said. But what saved her was her bond with you. That's rare and strong. Meanwhile, Lana tried to rebuild her defense. His lawyers asked for a re-evaluation of the video, claiming that the audio had been manipulated, which was a lie. But that wasn't surprising. People who make a living from manipulation don't know how to act any other way. They only know how to act. During this time, I went back to working part-time. My boss, a generous woman named Mrs. Dalton, understood my situation perfectly and said that I could continue supervising the equipment remotely, with flexible hours. This gave me the structure I needed to be present for all the important moments with Sophie. Lana, on the other hand, seemed increasingly distant from reality. During supervised visits, reports indicated that she tried to convince Sophie to tell another version of the video, saying that she had understood it wrong. Sophie was shaken, of course. He told me this after the second meeting. Said, she wants me to change the story, but the story is what happened. I held her hand and said, you don't need to change anything. You've done enough. Over time, visits began to be monitored even more. A child therapist was inserted into the sessions to observe interactions between mother and daughter. After the third visit, he called me. He said that Lana avoided eye contact with Sophie, that her speech was tense, and that she did not show empathy towards her daughter's feelings. She acts as if her daughter is an inconvenient witness, he commented. This only strengthened our case. But honestly, my goal wasn't to destroy Lana's image. I just wanted to protect my daughter. I wanted to ensure that she grew up in an environment where she could be heard without fear, corrected with respect, and above all, loved unconditionally. What pained me was that this was apparently too much to ask of some people. The day before the new hearing, Sophie helped me organize the documents. He separated the drawings he wanted to show, including the patchwork heart. If the judge asks what I felt, I will show it, he said. I smiled. I think it's a great idea. She then added, are you going to get nervous again? I thought for a moment before responding. Maybe a little, but now I know I'm not alone. The second hearing was scheduled for a rainy morning. We arrived early, me in a gray shirt, she in a yellow dress that was said to be lucky. Heather accompanied us, steady as always. Sophie held my arm as if to say, "I'm still here." And it was. And that changed everything. The courtroom felt colder than the first time. I don't know if it was the weather or the weight of what was about to happen. While we waited, I mentally reviewed everything I had read, all the reports, messages, details that could be important. But deep down, I knew that none of that mattered as much as what had already been shown, the truth. And the truth now had a name, face, and voice. It was my daughter. Lana entered accompanied by 2 different lawyers than the previous ones. She was different too. Hair tied up, face haggard, but the same look that I knew well, that of someone who was always 2 steps ahead in some strategy. But there was an important difference this time. She no longer controlled the environment. Judge Meredith Cole resumed her seat with firmness and serenity. He began by thanking all parties for their patience in the process, reinforcing that his commitment was solely to the well-being of the minor involved. Then, he opened the floor to the professionals who accompanied the supervised visits. The first to speak was the child therapist. He reported his observations in detail, mentioning how Sophie showed anxiety when she needed to meet her mother, and how Lana insisted on questioning her daughter about her father during meetings, instead of focusing on the relationship between the two. He used the word emotional intimidation, clearly. The room fell silent. Lana shifted in her seat, uncomfortable. Sophie looked at the floor, clutching the hem of her dress. Then it was Jenna's turn, the art therapist. She took some of Sophie's drawings to exemplify the advances and also the moments of emotional regression that arose after the meetings with her mother. "She has developed a very healthy sense of self here," Jenna said, pointing to a painting of Sophie smiling, next to me with the phrase, "Here I am heard." In contrast, he showed a drawing made after one of the visits. The same Sophie drawn with her mouth sewn shut. "This image speaks more than any report," he concluded. Lana tried to intervene. She asked to speak. Even without being called, the judge allowed it. "They're trying to paint me as a villain," she said. "But all I did was try to protect my daughter from an overbearing father figure." The judge elegantly interrupted her. "That's not the impression the reports give, Mrs. Walker. And the child himself demonstrates the opposite." Her lawyer then tried to present a new argument. That Sophie had been manipulated by me. That the video could have been rehearsed. That the child was saying what I wanted to hear. It was at that moment that the court definitively turned against her. The judge asked to hear Sophie, gently, in private, in a private room with the presence of a psychologist and a social worker. I couldn't get in. I stood there, hands shaking, while the clock didn't seem to move. It was 32 minutes that seemed like a century. When Sophie returned, she was serious but calm. He signaled okay with his thumb as we agreed. Heather hugged me. The judge returned shortly afterwards, with a heavy but determined expression on her face. This court recognizes that the child involved demonstrated, with unusual maturity for his age, full awareness of the dynamics occurring in his home. His reports were consistent, emotional, but also objective, and, above all, spontaneous. Then she announced the decision. Exclusive physical and legal custody for me. Lana would be entitled to monitored visits every 2 weeks in a supervised center, with quarterly reassessments based on therapeutic progress. At that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Not the kind of relief that comes with victory, but what comes with the end of a war. Sophie looked at me and smiled. That crooked smile she gave when she managed to draw something difficult. I held her hand and kissed her forehead. "You're safe now," I said. And I knew I was telling the truth for the first time in a long time. Lana left without talking to me, without looking at Sophie. Maybe because he knew that, deep down, he had lost much more than custody. She had lost her own daughter's trust. He had lost his disguise. After court, we went to eat at a restaurant that Sophie liked. One of those with animal-shaped pancakes. We sat in the booth next to the window. She ordered dog-shaped pancakes and a strawberry milkshake. I ordered black coffee, the first sip that hadn't tasted bitter in months. We talked about drawings, about classes, about what she wanted to do on vacation. Everything a conversation between father and daughter should be. Light. Real. Without fear. That night when we got home, she ran to get her things that make us feel safe notebook and wrote something new. He showed it to me with pride. It was written in big crooked letters. To have told the truth. At that moment, I realized that something fundamental had changed. We were no longer just survivors. Now, we were free. The days following the court's ruling were silent in a different way. It was not the silence of tension, of expectation, or of fear. It was the silence of relief, of reconstruction. Sophie went back to sleep peacefully, no longer clinging to the pillow as if waiting for someone to pull her away in the middle of the night. Now she slept with her face relaxed, her arms loose, and sometimes she even snored softly. That was music to me. Getting back to the routine was also a process. At first, everything seemed fragile, as if any wrong move could cause what we had worked so hard to protect to crumble. But little by little, Sophie started to smile more. He asked again to take his classmates home after school. She called me again to see the videos she recorded dancing on her cell phone. And in me, something also began to blossom. I resumed my runs in the park. The same trails that once seemed deserted to me now seemed to welcome me. I returned to maintaining equipment in person, but with lighter hours. My boss, Mrs. Dalton, suggested that I do small trainings for new technicians. I accepted. Teaching was a way to remember that I knew what I was doing, that my voice, so often silenced, also had value. Sophie continued art therapy with Jenna. In one of the sessions, she painted a mural with collages of landscapes, animals, and in the center, a child with a red cape. Jenna showed it to me later. She sees herself as a kind of unsung hero, he said. And it was. She was my hero. Not because he stood up to his mother, but for keeping your heart whole in the midst of so much chaos. One afternoon, while I was making dinner, Sophie came into the kitchen holding a piece of paper. "Daddy," he said, "I wrote a letter. It's for myself in the future. May I read it to you?" I sat with her at the table, and she read, in a clear voice, "Dear Sophie from the future, if you are scared, remember that you were once very brave, that you spoke the truth even though you were trembling inside, and that you and Daddy are a team. Don't forget that." I couldn't say anything. I just hugged her, tight. Sometimes love manifests itself in silence. Other times, it turns into words we never thought we would hear from a child. Shortly afterwards, I received a notification. Lana had filed a new request. She wanted to review the frequency of supervised visits. She said she was in therapy, that she had changed, that she deserved more time with her daughter. My lawyer advised caution. Let's watch calmly. The priority is Sophie's stability. I agreed. Not out of spite, but because I knew that, although the court could change its mind, children cannot be exposed to emotional instability as if they were adaptive robots. In the new assessment with the court-appointed psychologist, Sophie was clear. She said she didn't feel safe yet, that I preferred to keep everything as it was. The psychologist reported that forcing people to get closer could generate emotional setbacks. Result: Lana's request was rejected for now. And then, an unexpected thing happened. I got a message from Lana, the first in weeks. She wanted to talk. No lawyers, just the two of us. I was divided. Part of me wanted to hear it. Part of me was suspicious, but I accepted. We made an appointment in a discreet cafe on a rainy late afternoon. She arrived late, with her hair loose and her eyes swollen. He said, "Thank you for coming," and sat down without looking me in the eye. After a few seconds, he said, "I didn't know how much I was hurting her." I held my breath. I spent my whole life thinking that protecting meant controlling, but I guess I was just trying to protect myself from myself. I didn't say anything. I just listened. She cried. He apologized. He said he was in therapy, that he wanted to rebuild, not with me, but with his daughter. "I don't want her to grow up remembering me as a monster." I replied, "Then don't be." That was it. The conversation ended there. No agreements, no promises, but with a little spark of something I never thought I'd see in her: true regret. The following week, Sophie wrote something new in our security notebook. A message for me. "Daddy, even if Mommy gets better, I want to live with you forever. But I also want her to be okay." That was it. She didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. The days went on. Supervised visits continued. This time, the reports showed subtle changes. Lana started to listen more and talk less. There was still no confidence restored, but there was effort. And more than that, there was surveillance. The court now watched closely, and Sophie knew her voice was heard. And me? I was changing too. I started going to therapy. For the first time in my life, I began to wonder not just how to protect my daughter, but how to heal myself. About how I also carried marks. Marks of having been discredited, of having been silenced, of having swallowed the tears to appear strong. But now, perhaps for the first time since it all began, I felt like we were on the right path, that even amid the scars, there was room to flourish again. Spring came early that year in Portland. The air was lighter, The trees around the city were vibrant shades of green, and even the sun seemed to stay a little longer in the sky, as if the weather was giving us extra breath. Sophie began to wake up before her alarm clock, something rare in the previous months. A simple but powerful sign. She was becoming a child again. 4 weeks after Lana's last court attempt, we had our final hearing. This time there was no tension in my body, just attention. Sophie stayed with Heather, as we agreed, and I went to court alone. I took with me all the reports, the therapist's letters, Sophie's drawings, and the notebook with records of the routine we built together. But most of all, I had the peace of knowing that we had done everything right. Not perfect, but truthfully. Judge Meredith began by recalling the history of the case. She spoke firmly, but without aggression. He said he had been following stories like ours for years, but had rarely seen a child have such a clear impact on the direction of a process. This girl saved not only herself, but her father as well, and maybe even her mother, she said. I swallowed hard. The decision came clear, without fuss. Definitive physical and legal custody for me. Maternal visits would continue to be supervised indefinitely, until Lana demonstrated continued progress under therapeutic assessment. There would be no more lonely weekends, no more nights of fear, no more blackmail. For the first time in a long time, we were free. I left the courtroom and sat on the front steps. I didn't cry. I just breathed. I breathed like someone who spends years underwater and suddenly comes to the surface and feels the air fill their lungs completely. I was no longer the parent who needed to defend himself. I was the father who won, that protected, who believed, even when everything seemed against him. In the evening, I took Sophie to dinner at that same pancake restaurant. She ordered waffles this time. He looked at me with shining eyes and asked, "Is this forever?" I smiled and replied, "It's the beginning of our forever." She then took out a folded paper from her backpack. It was a new design. 2 big feet and 1 small pair, walking on a leafy path. Underneath she wrote, "The truth walks with us." In the following days, something changed in me too. It wasn't just relief, it was reconnection. I started looking at my own story more kindly. I started writing. About fatherhood, about fear, about overcoming. I wrote it for other people, but I realized that the one who needed to read it most was me. And I started to heal. Sophie grew more confident, more open. Sometimes he spoke of his mother with sadness, but without guilt. "She's still trying, right?" he said. And I'd say, "Yes, and she better try." Because part of what we learned in this process is that people can change, but not always in our time. And it is not our responsibility to save them. We continue with our notebook, which is now called Our Safe Place. From time to time, she writes questions. I once read one that stuck with me. "Daddy, can love hurt and still be love?" I thought a lot before responding. I wrote, "When love hurts, it needs to change. If it doesn't change, it's not love. It's fear in disguise." Today, when I look back, I don't see a story of judicial war. I see a journey of courage. The courage of a child who did not accept silence as an inheritance. The courage of a father who learned to listen, to shut up when it was time to listen, and to speak when the world needed to listen. And yes, the courage to recognize that love is not enough. It takes action, presence, daily choice. Lana continues to be accompanied by therapists. And although there is still a long way to go before the relationship between her and Sophie is restored, I hope she finds her own path. Because when a child finds their voice, the world around them also needs to learn to listen. And if you've made it this far, I really want to thank you. This story was not easy to tell, but I believe that stories like this need to be told. Because surely, there is someone on the other side right now, experiencing something similar. Maybe you are a father, a mother, an aunt, a sibling, someone who feels like they are alone against a wall of lies. Maybe you're thinking that the truth will never be enough, but let me tell you something. The truth may be small, but when it comes from the right place, it becomes invincible. If this story touched your heart in any way, subscribe to the channel, not only to support this type of content, but to be part of a community that welcomes, listens, and shares. Your every entry is a sign that stories like this are not being told in vain. And if you've been through something similar, or if this story helped you see something in a new way, comment below. Tell us. We read each comment with care. And believe me, what you share can help other people not feel so alone too.